KiyosakiMania.com. Who we're talking today are Tom Wheelwright, Rich Dad Advisor on Taxes, author of Tax-Free Wealth, and Ken McElroy, Rich Dad Real Estate Advisor, and my sweetheart, Kim. We're now in the favorite part of the program, which is Ask Robert, where you get to ask your questions, and we'll do our best to answer them for you. So, Melissa, what's the first question?
Our first question today comes from Sam in Bakersfield. Favorite book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. The question is this: how will China's slowing economy affect the world?
That is the best question of the day, because I just came back from Asia, and I was in Singapore, and the Chinese government is now after any of those Chinese guys, especially the bureaucrats, who move money out of China. It's called a clawback in many ways. They want to find out where you put the money. So that means in Singapore right now, the real estate market is being hit. Vancouver, Canada, many of those criminal Chinese bureaucrats moved their money into Vancouver. New York City, San Francisco, Singapore, Hong Kong, and right now property prices are crashing in Hong Kong. Just because the Chinese government, that's just real estate. They're going after those guys who took the money out, which is what Tom is saying. They're going after tax dodgers. Any comments for Tom?
Well, the same thing's happened in the U.S., right? I mean, that's what we've seen in the last several years in the U.S., where the IRS is going after making you report what money you have offshore. I mean, I think this is happening all over the world. I don't think it's restricted to China, the U.S.
But China's going to sink the property markets.
But China,
won with the money.
There's so much Chinese ownership of real estate in every country. I think it's going to be.
What's happening in Hawaii, Kim, where our boat is?
Oh, well, this is amazing. They are building thousands of condos, this one area, thousands of condos, and most of them
in Honolulu.
In Honolulu. Great area, but number one, there's not enough infrastructure, I don't think, to support it. I mean, the traffic is going to be horrendous. A lot of these people, a lot of the buyers are Chinese, Korean. Chinese and Korea are probably the two biggest buyers. And the starting price, just to even get a chance to look at it, is like $600,000. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy money.
That's just to stand in line. They want $600,000.
They're building a separate city, basically.
They were selling $20 million condos without, just from the plans. Full cash would come in from China. So that means if there's a clawback, it's going to be exciting, right, Kenny?
What that means is that the people that sold those are going to be in trouble too.
Yeah. So China's going to affect everything. When the economy goes down in China, the world economy goes down.
Well, we buy everything from there.
Right.
Everything.
I mean, almost everything.
And what about with their slowing economy and all the resources that were going into China to prop up all the infrastructure and all the materials? That's all the natural resources now are
And I
slowing.
realized I didn't do such a good job on what the yuan becoming part of the international currency means. It's the first poor country that has an international currency, which means that prices have to come down because the labor prices will come down for everybody. So that's what Kim was talking about the last time, was about what's happening with McDonald's right now on the kiosks.
Oh, they're building kiosks to go in all the McDonald's internationally to replace employees because McDonald's is so concerned about the rising minimum wage.
And what's interesting is the wages have risen in China, and that's why it's moved to Malaysia, Vietnam, and
now Myanmar because it just opened.
Yeah, so that's been an interesting thing to watch. It's because everything used to be made in China, and now that's all moving.
Next question, Melissa.
Our next question is from John in Tucson, Arizona. Favorite book, Unfair Advantage. He says, let's assume with a crash that unemployment skyrockets. How do we protect our real estate assets when the jobs are no longer there to provide the renters?
That's a great question because as Kenny taught Kim and I, real estate is only as good as there's
jobs.
And so we're kind of facing that right now in the oil patch.
Yeah,
right?
well, we're seeing it on our properties that we own in some of the Oklahoma area and certainly in Houston, where oil prices are down and
100,000 people were laid off.
Yeah, and it's definitely affected. It's definitely affected our occupancies, and it's definitely affected. It'll affect your rent growth. It'll affect your cash flow.
And the thing that's kind of interesting is I love Texas. It's a great state and all that. But when I talk to Texans, they say, well, the price of oil is not going to affect us.
Yeah. Well, they have smaller hats now.
This is the thing. The price of oil affects the rich because I know it affects Kim and I.
Sure.
That when the price of oil comes down, our royalty checks are not as big. And we count on those. A lot of people count on those royalty checks. So it's not going to just affect the worker. It's going to affect the rich people who depend upon those royalty checks, or like Russia, which depends upon $90 a barrel oil, and it's at $45 a barrel oil. That's going to bankrupt some of the Russians. You look at Venezuela, which is the biggest oil producer in the world, and they're bankrupt already. So that's why it's affecting everybody, and it affects real estate, but it affects retail, it affects food, it affects everything. So that's why this crash is so important.
So, Kenny, does it make sense to look at where the job growth is, in what industries that is, and technically, choose properties that are close to that?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I mean, we're following healthcare and tech. So, the growing.
That's why we did well in San Antonio, because it's healthcare and insurance.
That's exactly right. Yeah, healthcare. The aging population, the baby boomers. Anything with medical, healthcare, and then of course tech is just booming like crazy. Oil has always been up and down,
right?
Always. So
it's a boom and
it's
bust.
no surprise to me.
Oil's going to affect the whole world. That's one way or the other affects the whole world, and that's really what this. It's a big crash. It's a big crisis. When Russia was dependent upon $90 oil to break even, and now it's about $50, that's serious for their economy. Next question, Melissa.
And if you have a question, please go to Rich Dad Radio, Ask Robert, and submit your questions, because we want to get to as many questions as possible.
Our next question comes from Jean-Paul in Wisconsin. Favorite book, Cash Flow Quadrant. Says, I'm in the process of purchasing my first investment property. I found a nice 4-unit apartment building near a campus and close to 2 hospitals that would bring in a positive monthly cash flow if I did not own or occupy the property. I would like to start living in one of the units, which would cost me $200 a month to make the mortgage payment, thus a negative cash flow. What are the advantages or disadvantages of this strategy of an owner-occupied property?
Well, first of all, you got to separate consumption versus investment. So I think it's a great property, just from the sound of it, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a great location.
Why is it great? Why does it sound good?
Well, because it's near universities, and when
hospitals.
And hospitals, yeah.
Well, and I look at the math, and I'm going, so what you're saying is that you're occupying one unit for $200 a month. I'm going, tell me where you can get rent for $200 a month.
That's a pretty
good deal to me.
Yeah. But he's got to separate consumption from investment, and that's the big thing. How would you talk to him about tax and entity?
Well, I would do that. I'd say, look, it's a 4-unit. It's 4 units. So 3 of the units you're going to rent, when you're going to occupy. So think of it 1 as your home and 3 as rentals. And I'd treat it that way from a cash flow standpoint, treat it that way from a tax standpoint.
And I would get Kenny's book, especially the ABCs of Property Management, because that's really the key to make it work or not work, right?
Yeah, I mean, basically, he's got a free place to live, and he's wondering why it doesn't cash flow. That's kind of funny to me, but
he's doing good.
It's not a bad question, but
and
it's no surprise.
You're thinking straight. That's the good thing. And this is what I want to say, okay? No matter if the economy crashes or collapses, there's still an economy. People will still be buying food. They'll still be driving cars. They'll still need a place to live. They'll buying clothes and shoes and all that. There's still an economy. It won't be the boom economy we got used to. And that's why I'm saying we thank you for listening to Rich Dad. I think crashes are the best of times because it flushes